Welcome, everybody, to the Choices, Chances, Changes show with Georgie Dickins and myself, Kit Tran. Today, we're extremely lucky to have my friend, buddy Marcel Chambers, who heads up sales at InfoPro Digital. We'll discuss the transformative power of personal and professional decisions that Marcel's made throughout his career. Marcel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kiet. Thank you, Georgie. I appreciate the invitation.
Like Kit and I always get secretly, maybe not secretly, maybe very outwardly, very excited when we bring guests on the show because every guest on the show is by invitation, and it's about bringing inspiring people who are doing inspiring things across the industry, and us really teasing out some of the lessons that have shaped your journey in order that we can democratize those and more people get to learn from them. And we'll talk about your current career, but your track record or your journey is extraordinary. And even the countries you've lived, from Amsterdam to Hong Kong to South Korea to Thailand to Canada, now in Tennessee to, again, Kit tells me that you've been working on a rice paddy farm. There's a rowing hobby, so there's so much to unpack here. And the question is, how did you become you? Give us a sense of what did you dream of becoming as a 7-year-old Marcel?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think I was lucky in the sense that my mother's Czech, so I kind of had a always sort of an international view. And growing up, we lived. My father's a professor, so we did sabbaticals and lived in Denmark and later in the south of France, and then he taught at Oxford for a year. So I always kind of loved, I think, travel just from the perspective that it gives, because I think it's, when you travel, I think it's, T.S. Eliot said, at the end of our journeys, we'll return to where we started and know the place for the first time. And I think the more that I travel, and when I return to where I grew up, it's smaller, but you kind of understand it better. And I think getting a change of perspective early was very addictive for me. And and I think sport has always been very constant in my life. I think I played a number of sports, and loved competing and loved the teamwork and the camaraderie there. And my early ambition was to go into international development. And so I was fortunate, as a teenager, to be selected by Canadian International Development Agency to represent Canada on an agricultural exchange. So it was a great program. We spent 4 months in on a farm in Ontario, on a beef and cattle farm, with Thais who flew over, and then we spent 4 months on a rice farm, in Kampeng Pet, which is halfway between Bangkok and Chiang Mai, close to the Burmese border. And at that time, it was, there was no telephone, there was no electricity. We were farming with water buffaloes, and I was living with a family. And I think that experience just really struck me in how big the world is, but how fascinating, but also how similar, people are. I mean, how close you can become with people, and learn the language, and wake up, and build those routines, and their values, and living in a Buddhist society. So that's really what got me hooked on that. And then I think, yeah, I just became very passionate. I wanted to go in, work for the UN, work in for NGOs. And that was really the early track, of what I loved. And I was very passionate about that. And I had done some projects like building adobe houses in Venezuela, cultural restoration, and just that aspect of, I've always loved emerging markets and developing countries, from the excitement there. And you see the change happening right in front of you. You see this going from rural to urban environments. You see large. So that's kind of how I started. There's lots of, I've done a lot of different jobs. And I don't want to go, let me know how far you want me to go into that. But that was my early passion. And reading was another huge passion of mine. And I think at 7, I wanted to be a writer. So that was what I really loved, reading the classics and the canon, and, Hemingway, and, Jack London, but then Dostoevsky, and, Tolstoy, and just, so that was kind of how I grew up. And so,
Now, how do
Okay.
you get into the sorry, Georgie?
No, you go.
How do you get into the media and finance world from that background?
I mean, that's a great question. I went and I studied philosophy. I studied philosophy and then political science. During my undergrad, I did a year abroad in Amsterdam, the University of Amsterdam, and then was rowing for that school, and eventually went to graduate school there, for European political economy. And my original ambition was to go work for the EU on European integration and enlargement, again with the emerging markets and Central Asia. And that time I'd done a lot on, geopolitics and, pipeline politics. I think that was in the early 2000s. And then I had a friend who was working at Merrill Lynch, and I was finishing my dissertation. He said, "Come to Hong Kong." So I bought a one-way ticket to Hong Kong, and it's a lot of fun here. And then that kind of turned into 6 months at a time to 18 years later. And I think as I was writing a lot, I was writing lots of papers, and it was natural to go into journalism. And so I think there was a small publication in Hong Kong at the time, HR magazine. So I got a job there, very small. I was working, 6 days a week, 15 hours a day for very little money, but I loved it. I just loved media in terms of the access, that you get, and also the ability to kind of influence the market. And I think even, I was always very ambitious in terms, I went to the Clinton Global Initiative, and I asked to interview Bill Clinton. And, I've always loved getting, just see what happens, right? I think it's just like, there is no limit. Let's just try. What's the worst thing that can happen? And I think, for 2 years, and then I was approached by Asia Risk to work for, Asia Risk magazine, which was much bigger. It was global, and so it just kind of happened through that. And I think, the thing I love about media is just it's a platform, but you can influence the market, even in terms of today, where we have close to 1 million subscribers, and including lots of central banks, and working with, that ecosystem of technology vendors to GSIB banks to to emerging markets, and doing a lot in Vietnam, Indonesia, and just kind of so I think that's really where a lot of my career has been, in that intersection of commercial strategy, marketing, but really, I mean, I think really sort of developing markets. And I think I've, working in the risk transfer, we do have a real purpose. I think after 2008, there was a need to, understand what's happening. And I had a front row seat to the whole market almost imploding, working with Lehman Brothers at the time. And, you realize that, we have an important part of, informing the industry, but educating, but also bringing together various components of the industry. So bringing the regulator together with the bank, bringing the asset owners together with the regulator and the bank. And so that's kind of how I got into media, and it's changed a lot. I was there back in the day when we had, magazines. I think a lot of our younger staff, we, I was selling print ads, and we were, like staying up all night during the publication deadline. And, we had, at that time we were in Incisive Media, so we had very great publishers and editors. And I don't know if you're familiar with the title. It's always been very deep and technical, but it's been very high standard of content. So I think that's really what how I got into what I do today. So
one of the things that really strikes me in terms of, as you've shared the different industries or sectors that you've been part of, there's a love for what you do. And I suppose my question is, and it was interesting because you mentioned that when you were on the farm there was no telephone, and I thought how interesting, what a world it would be today if we, to have those times where we have space to think and that quiet thinking time. How important in your opinion, is it to love what you do?
Oh, I think it's everything. I mean, I think my whole philosophy to leadership is culture and passion. And I think you need to be very, you need to inspire the team or the teams or the company. And I think what I always do with younger employees who join us is, you may think what you're doing is just quite repetitive, or if you're doing data, it ties into a bigger picture. I mean, I think what some of the stuff we do on anti-money laundering, or FTO designation of cartels, or the BSA, I mean, these are people's lives, these are people's pensions. And I think you don't understand, you need to understand that what we do is not just this event or this project, but we are making the industry safer. We are reducing the risk of another financial crash. And I think when you're able to communicate that to the wider team, and kind of reinforce that North Star, and also how and I'm also a big believer in is put people where their strengths are. I think when you identify strengths in your team or their teams, it's important for people to thrive in what they like to do and what they're good at. So I always think it's like, from a sports metaphor, if you're putting together a basketball team, or you're putting together an 8 in rowing, you put people where they're very good. There's different parts of the boat that, different strengths apply. But yeah, I think one of the things that I was very lucky, I think my father told me, is just do what you like to do. And I think that was key in me studying humanities at first, and philosophy, because I love philosophy, because it's really forces you to reduce extreme complexity into kind of very simple concepts. But the process of that, understanding that complexity, is very hard. But at the end of it, you really understand the concept. And so I think loving that and being passionate about that, the longer I stayed in school, the better my grades were. And it's not about the externalities. I think especially when you're younger, if you think that I'm doing this because I'll get a 10% pay increase. I mean, are you doing this because this is something you like to do, or you love to do, or it ties into your authentic mission, kind of in life? And then you will thrive because you're more passionate about it. And a lot of this stuff is very hard. And so if you don't love it, you can really see people pull away that love what they do. And, rather than the people that are doing what they do because they think it's what they should do, or it's an inauthentic, thing that they're doing. So.
And I suppose a question for me that is kind of splinters off from here is, you just seem full of energy. You talked about before we started, you said, I've been up since 4 a.m. Yet there's a vibrancy, there's a high energy to you. Like, is this DNA, or what is the secret?
No, I mean, I think, it's important. I always try to start the day. I think morning routine is really important. I think for me, habits are very important, and the discipline around that. And I think I always start the day, kind of reviewing objectives, but how they tie into, larger purpose. And I think, and also, starting out with a workout, because that gets you energized, and, the more you move. But the biggest thing that I've kind of discovered probably in the last 10 years is just, why do you do what you do? And the why is really important. But also, what does that mean? And the longer I'm in my career, it's about, okay, giving back, and how can what can I contribute now? I think you've got, Jungian stages of how you develop, but it's, you recognize you do have a lot of experience, particularly to share. And I think my passion around community building, and bringing people together is hugely motivating, because you're doing something that's beyond yourself. And I think when you recognize that, and get away from ego and title that you're searching it, that's the engine that keeps me going. That's kind of where I wake up at 4 every day and go till 8. And and people as well. I think I've recognized I love connecting with people. And I think, regardless of, I've been in sales a long time, regardless of selling, it's just, how do you create those authentic connections? And I think our platform is great for that, because we can bring various stakeholders together, and they learn, and so seeing that is really exciting for me. But yeah, it's it can, I do get tired, and you also have to recognize when you need a break. But I think it's largely just, you're driven by the why. And I think it's something, as you contribute to something greater than yourself, it's very powerful. So
Now, Marcel, you mentioned rowing a few times, and I know you're like that's one of your favorite thing to do. Like, how much of the core tenets of rowing influence the way you lead?
yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, I played a lot of sports. I mean, again, I was competing in decathlon because I like a lot of variety. I get bored just doing the same thing. But I think, when I eventually ended up rowing, I rowed in college, and then I rowed, after college, and then I had the privilege of rowing, you know, in Hong Kong. I'm a member of the Royal Hong Kong Yacht Club that I competed there. I've rowed for, Amsterdam, ASSR School, and when I returned to North America, I rowed for St. Catharines, and now I row for Nashville Rowing Club, and I'm on the board there. I just see rowing as a great instant community. And so anywhere that I go in the world, I can join a rowing club, and I have immediate group of like-minded individuals, friends. I think the other thing that I really love about rowing, taking the sport aside, is, everyone's the same. So you're in an eight, some eights in Hong Kong, you're with the CEO of, Societe Generale, there's somebody who's a student, there's somebody who's, I don't know, somebody totally different. And when you're in the boat, you're all the same. And you're all trying to do something together, and there's discipline involved. You're trying to row together. I don't know if you've ever rowed, but you're in a shell. It's very tippy. And if anyone's a little bit out of sync, or this side blade, the starboard blade's higher than the port blade, you fall over, and you catch what's called catching a crab, where your blade goes over. So rowing for me is the balance between discipline, team, community, sacrifice, and commitment. And we row at 5 in the morning. So I think having that shared experience of all of us sacrificing our sleep, waking up, doing that together, racing together, and then ideally winning, or but as I've been longer in the sport, it's more just about being out on the water, seeing the sunrise, steam coming off the water. It's almost a spiritual experience for me. But I think as it pertains to my leadership, I think it's really about, you need people to work together. You need an eight to work together. You need to, put your personal, ego aside, and there aren't any prima donnas that really last in rowing. You have to work with people that you might have nothing in common with, and I think, it's important for all of the teams, or all of teams that in our company that are working that way. And I think, as we, more importantly, team collaboration, shared vision, which you have in rowing, has to take place at the corporate level, or you end up with a lot of dysfunction and wasted energy and demotivated employees. So.
I love the rowing analogy. I've just written so many notes there, and as I listen to you, it's that you're meeting everyone kind of peer to peer. To your point, there isn't title, there's no pedestalization. Like, everyone is equally important, and everyone needs that shared vision and that commitment and that discipline. Because one person, it's like if you think of trading floors, they talk about the toxic jerk genius. Like, they're not healthy to the culture.
Yeah.
You can't have the prima donnas, as you said. Like, everyone needs to be there with the same intent, the same vision.
Yeah. And right, it doesn't matter if you're the strongest person in the world, you're the fastest rower in the world. If you're in the boat and you're not rowing with everyone else, the boat's going to go very slowly. Because you're not going to be in time, you're not going to be in sync. The other team isn't going to, I used to row in stroke seat, which is the back of the boat, which is kind of it's strange because you're going backwards, but everybody follows the stroke. And and I've been stroke in different continents, and just having the team follow you, you have to have a lot of consistency, which is big in my leadership philosophy. It's not about charisma, but it's about being consistent, being steady, calm under pressure, and where the team can look to when things are going south, or there's challenges, or you're short on a quarter and there's lots of pressure. You still have to stay steady, consistent, regardless, and bring the team with you. You can't, if you're stroke and you start speeding up, then the rest of the team can't follow. So there's a lot. There's probably 100 lessons I could share, but those would probably be the biggest ones. Yeah.
You could, like, my leadership philosophy learned from rowing. And my youngest son's got a podcast, and he interviewed, it's a rugby podcast. He's 13, and he interviewed Sir Clive Woodward, who was the winning coach of when England won the World Cup. And he talks about the acronym TCUP, thinking calmly under pressure. But you can be the best team in the world, but when there are unknowns that happen, how you show up in those moments.
Yeah.
And not every team, and his point is, not every team practices the teacup. They focus on all making their strengths super strengths, but it's about the variables. It's anticipating the unknowns, and so you can have that level of situational preparedness.
Yeah, no, I think 100%, and it's and rowing, but sport in general teaches you that. It teaches you, you have, I've had regattas where you have 10,000 people watching, and they're cheering, and you have to be able to drown out a lot of that and just focus on what you're doing and do what you need to do. If you're in stroke or you're in bow or you're balancing the boat, it's not, or if you have another boat coming up on you, you can't all panic, and that you have to stay steady and together. I think the other thing that I'm really big on is process. And I think as when I started out as an individual, contributor or quota carrying sales, I didn't care so much about the quota. I just focused on the process. And then, which is literally what you do every day to get to the outcome.
Yeah.
So you focus on the process of what you're doing. And I think sport teaches a lot of that. And you work on the process, and you adapt the process, and you increase the process or you decrease it, or you change your, talking about sports, your periodization, and stick to that. And then when you're on race day, it takes care of itself. And I think when I was selling, focusing on the process, which is in your control, always got me to exceed my target or quota. And I didn't worry about that, because I knew that I trusted in the process. And I think that is something I try to teach the teams, especially when they're stressed or they're behind. And I'm just like, come back to your process. What can you do today? Are you doing enough of that? Do you need to change that process? And I think that, any sport, I think, really teaches you that. So, yeah.
Yeah, trusting the process is important, but back to the theme of the show, which is choices, chances,
Right.
changes.
Yes.
And
yeah.
the key is, look, you've made a lot of choices. You've had a lot of changes. Like, what process you use to make decisions?
I try to use a lot of intuition. So I try to, whatever, trust my gut, or, and I think that generally, I mean, things that scare me a bit are usually things I should do. Things that are outside of my comfort zone, I should do, because that is something I need to face. I think you have to have a lot of courage and be vulnerable at times. I think that's a big part of growth. But yeah, I think, the two things, what do I like to do is also, and then how can I impact the most change to the most number of people? Then is also something I choose. So regardless of other things, it's okay. Well, even how I divide my time, it's a constant struggle, because you have 24 hours in a day, let alone you've got to sleep. And then I've got a family of, three young boys, and a terrific wife who's very supportive, plus, sport, and all the volunteer stuff I do, and the boards and world rowing, plus my day job. And I have teams in Hong Kong, Singapore. So you have global teams. So I think how do I choose where I spend my time is usually, thinking about the top priorities of where can this make the most impact, and also, what do I really feel is important, for the organization, for my family, for the sport I do. And that's how I've made most of the major choices and in my life. But some of the choices, you have to recognize opportunity when it presents itself. And I think, you probably have everybody has amazing opportunities in their life. But if they're afraid, and that's what dictates their choice, I think sometimes you miss opportunities. So I'm always, looking for opportunities. I think there's always opportunities. And the other thing is, I mean, I would never in a million years, 10 years ago, say I'd be living in Nashville, Tennessee, and kind of doing what I'm doing today. I think you can't always connect the dots going forward, right? But I think if you need some North Star. And I mean, the other thing too is values. So I'm very clear on what my values are, and integrity, honesty, being open, transparent. I think client centric, I think, is important, and value driven. I think I've learned early. I was taught early in my career, always add value. And if you're always adding value, whatever, the pay will increase, and I have clients that I've worked with for 20 years, and they know that about me. And wherever they end up, over 5 companies, they call me up because they know that I'll be honest, I'll be focused on value for them. And it's been very, kind of a strong, part of my life in terms of how I make my decisions based on those. So. And sometimes you're tempted, you're always tempted to do things that, take you away from that. But also you need to have integrity with yourself and your values, and also even understand and write down what your values are. So, because I think a lot of people, they haven't really kind of really mapped those out. And you feel those times when you're doing something that feels inside a little bit out of joint, or whether if you value health and you're eating, I don't know, chips and chocolate bars for dinner, you sense it, right? So I think, yeah.
It's interesting with you talk about values. I remember when I was in my transition, leaving a corporate job into creating my own business, and I had a coach at the time. They're like, "What are your values?" And I kind of looked at them blankly to be like, kind of, what do you mean? Like, and I'd never gone through the process of exploring what my values were. And now I'm very clear on what my values are. They do evolve, and it's making sure the yeses, there's a congruency between the art and the values. And I want to go back to the word courage came up for me. Before I do, what did make me smile when you talked about, intuition is really important. I woke up this morning and my Aura ring hadn't updated, and I was like, so how good do I feel? I'm not sure, because I'm reliant on my but it's like, no, just go with your intuition, like you feel good. But it is, I think, with so much automation in life and technology, which is so, is beneficial, it's making sure we don't lose touch of that intuition and that messaging within us that is often a compass.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of the philosophers that I studied talked about that, whether it's, and again, I don't want to go too philosophical, but, Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, where he talked about the Apollinian, which is science and reason, versus the Dionysian, which is kind of experience and, or Heidegger's, Dasein, where it's really being present. And, I think, we've in Western society, we oscillate between the two, and you'll see periods where we go really into science, and I'm the same. I look at my health data and I'm like, oh, I can't work out now. I don't have my, all my stuff set up. But there is something about experienced and lived experience that, even in the age of AI, that's an important part of it. And I think Kit and I were talking about this the other week. It's like it can take you so far, but you still need that human lived experience as part of that. And I think there is something that, a lot of these philosophers, whether it's Husserl or, they recognize, was that, we during the Enlightenment, we went all into the science, we went all into logic and analytics. And then, there was something missing. I think there's something missing, and another, influential, kind of thinker or, professor or, is Robert Putnam, and particularly his book around, the deterioration of community, and whether, maybe it's too extreme what he said, but we do find ourselves, I think, a lot of times more atomized, more, kind of separate, or people really yearn for community, which is, we are humans. And I think for me, that's a real big driver, because I think without community, you can't gather with people with different views and a common understanding. So for me, sport is a great vehicle for that. What we do with our events, and but yeah, I think you're constantly battling between, logic and feeling. And I think, coming back to, sales and marketing, people, I truly believe people buy with their right brain and they justify with their left. So you need to be able to make connections, through relationships. And that's what's always fascinated me about it, is the part of art and science, but also emotion and science. And I think we're in a period now where, the technologists are dominating, and and you have a lack of, humanities. And my brother's a philosophy professor at American University, and they're under, people, it's hard to get students there. Everyone wants to study, engineering and math, the STEMs. But those are important parts, of society, and how we organize ourselves. Even how we build ethics, and how we understand ethics and values. So yeah, I think that's a long answer to your question, but it is one of the things that really drives me. And then having spent a lot of time, you know, being interested in the arts and literature and philosophy, you do see, and also history, I think, is a great teacher for me, because whenever I'm feeling very stressed, I'll go back to read history, because you can see these periods and swings of the pendulum going back and forth. So
it's I just love every answer you're sharing here, hence I'm writing so many notes. The question I had on courage, which I didn't ask, but is there is an element, as I listen to you, I suppose the word that comes up is boundless, like anything is possible. And you mentioned, with the Clinton Global Institute or the initiative, you were like, right, I'm going to just ask if I can interview President Clinton, like just see what happens. Did you end up interviewing him? And that was my first question.
No. I think I put interview requests for Kevin Rudd, Bill Clinton, and the president of Mongolia. But I didn't get any of them, which is fine. I think courage is the being comfortable with failure, and however you want to define failure. And I think understanding that, what do you really have to lose? And I think that's what really, it's kind of a balance between humility and self-belief. And it's difficult because to be, that sort of gold of humility, you have, and also the could be the arrogance or confidence of self-belief, don't always go together. But definitely, I mean, for courage now, it's what do I not want to do, and then asking yourself, why don't I want to do that? And is it fear? Do I think I have something to lose? Which, at the end of the day, we really don't. I mean, I think if you remember, and again, there's this is sort of modern neo-stoic movement, where they say memento mori, remember you're going to die soon, and that, the things like that. But I think having that perspective, but yeah, it is a constant daily I wouldn't say struggle, but it's a challenge, I think, that I like. And it's like I try to do something every day that scares me a bit. And that's also keeps you excited. And or when I moved back to Canada, I started playing ice hockey. So becoming being comfortable with being a beginner again, I think, is really important. Like, just when you're a beginner, you're failing all the time, you're falling down, and I think as we get older, we're less comfortable with that. So I think that's, for me, what defines courage is just pushing through that comfort barrier, and just putting things in perspective properly, and putting away your ego and your pride, and just in sales, it's easy because you're constantly getting told no, or but being resilient in that, and getting up again and trying again. I think that's for me what courage is. So.
And you said a little while ago, you were talking about the right brain, left brain, and you said the words, the importance of being present. And I really wanted to dig a little bit deeper there, because there's so much noise around us. And you even talk about the rowing, you have to work out how you can not take on everyone's voices, because then it would take away the focus to be in the boat. But what I suppose, again, I think it's really important being present as a leader, but I will ask you, how important is it to be, being present as a leader? And how do you do it?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and how do you stay present?
I have in the past done some meditation and yoga. I think rowing is, for me, like when I'm on the water, there's no phone, there's no, I'm connecting with nature. I try to go out for a hike sometimes if I feel, because the thing is, the more stressed you become, your cortisone increases and your aperture narrows. Yeah. And you're not present, because you're seeing things in a very narrow and kind of urgent way, and you lose the bigger picture. And I think as a leader, you can't afford to be like that with the team, because then you're not thinking about them, and what do they need at that time. So I think being present, I mean, like I have some things that I do, but definitely rowing is good. I think getting out, I think travel is good too when you need it. I think getting out and doing something, I like to trek. So I went to Peru with my wife and did the Salcante trek, like just getting away. I think being present requires perspective, but it's also just, understanding that, the past is the past. There's no point stressing about it. The future, we just do what we can do, and just return to the now. I mean, I think definitely I struggled early in my career When I was with my family, I was thinking about work. When I was at work or traveling, I was thinking about my family. And I think it's just understanding that, I'm at work, I'm going to focus at work. I'm at home, I'm going to be present with my kids, and, not, it's just, I've learned a lot from, I have a 6, 9, and 10-year-old boys, and just trying to see things through their lens, or their, it's also very, it makes you present, because kids are very present. They're, just so I think it's really getting in touch. I mean, there are definitely techniques like, breathing or meditation or yoga has been very important for me, like over the years, just slowing things down, I think. But I mean, you're right, I think we're in a world of increasing complexity, increasing ways that you can be accessible. I remember I used to enjoy plane rides because I could switch off for, 12 hours flying to Asia. Now you have internet, so you're getting, Teams messages, and it's turned into 12 hours of work for me. But yeah, it is very challenging, and I think it's more challenging probably than it ever has been, just with the speed at which society's moving and technology. So.
You talk about your boys, the 6, 9, and 10-year-olds. I've got 2 boys, they're slightly older, but the kids are great teachers in being present. They're also great teachers. You talk about that beginner's mindset of being curious, because they haven't yet been layered with life, and so there's a real purity and a wholesomeness in terms of how they see the world, and often children can be really boundless. They don't see ceilings. And this is so I think it leaning in. I think we can teach our children, but I think our children can also be.
I think even looking at, even looking at some of our, new starters of staff, I always try to learn something. And you'll find, even in the teaching process, if you approach it with what can I learn, and I'm constantly interviewing. I mean, I travel a lot. I'll be speaking to Lyft drivers, Uber drivers, and I mean, everybody has something they can teach you, and it, regardless of their socioeconomic status or what they do. So I think, you said something very important, I think, is curiosity. And I think if you're constantly curious, and you're constantly learning, I think then things are really boundless. And, I think, my father said, learn something new every day, which was a lesson that stuck with me. And I try to do that. And thankfully, in my job, we're speaking with data scientists, quant professors, energy traders. Like the area that we cover is very complex, as Kit knows, XVA trading. So it's learning all those things every day, but also connecting the parts to the whole, because you can also go down rabbit holes of complexity. But what's really important are those connections. How do you connect? And I think how my career, being a journalist, being a researcher, has allowed me to think more sort of laterally, and kind of understand how to connect various parts, which I think, a lot of ways we teach now, a lot of ways our careers go, it's very stovepiped or very siloed, or you get people that they see everything from what they're doing. But I think curiosity and, well, how could this part, fit over here? How can, this particular part fit there? I think has been, very instrumental for me. And also, yeah, curiosity. I also think being grateful is a great stress reliever. For me, I mean, I've definitely had some very hard times, and when I went to Hong Kong, I was staying in a dormitory in Chungking Mansion, and eating cans of noodles, and noodles and tuna every day, and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for my career. I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've had, the people I've met, and I think when you approach the day with that gratitude, the stress disappears. And I think it's important to still be thankful, and basically for everything. I mean, for opportunities, to people, to your staff, and express that, because I think that that is something, the higher you go, or, so to say, it's, the more you feel the burden of that, or the weight of that responsibility, and you forget where you came from, or you forget all the things you've had to overcome, and to get there. So just to be grateful of that, and celebrate sometimes, when things go well. So
You seem to have a lot of learning experience through sports, through philosophy. But in terms of like leaders that you can learn from that influence you, like what are some of the leaders that influenced you throughout your career that's really helped as well?
I mean, again, I've been fortunate to have had a lot of, managers that believed in me, that kind of gave me a lot of autonomy. I think I've also always tried to find mentors. I always try to find people, and Kit, yourself, you've been great in what I've learned from you over the years, and again through rowing and being a member of clubs. You have people that are 10, 15 years older, or have managed I don't know, $50 billion firms, or are running $10 billion hedge funds or private equity funds. And I think just being able to surround yourself with people like that are doing things that you're struggling with, and learning from them, through other vehicles like sport, or volunteering. There's some great folks on the board of some of the, and even at World Rowing now. I mean, I had a dinner with Matthew Pinson, and you just I think always finding people that have been under tremendous pressure or stress, like it. So I wouldn't say it's any individual. It's been so many individuals, and everything that I've accomplished, or where I am today, is as a result of of all of those lessons, and the patience, and the support, and the guidance. So I realize, whenever I'm in a period of where I don't feel the growth taking place, I go and seek out some people that will challenge me, in terms of what they are doing, or what they have learned, and that I can learn from them. So
Yeah, I love that. I love you shared about your father, who talked about curiosity, and my dad passed away a couple of years ago, and when I was younger, we used to have these autograph books at school, where you take them, and your school friends had all written them. And I remember my dad put, and I don't think he made this up, so I don't know who to attribute it to, but his poem that he put in my book was, "Learn while you are young, before you grow old. Learning is better than silver and gold. Silver and gold will vanish away, but a good education will never decay." And he was all about education and learning and growth. And that poem always struck with me. He placed such importance on, learn, grow, experience, and exactly what you said earlier about do things that scare you, because that shows you are growing. And there's a difference between something being scary versus dangerous. Dangerous is climbing up Everest without any safety equipment, or maybe doing a marathon without any training. That's potentially dangerous. But doing things that stretch us, it can feel uncomfortable, but it's that discomfort, that messy middle. That's the growth stage.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and I think it's different for every person. What scares them, what they need to try. And I think a lot of us, and it's very easy, is to sit in something what's comfortable. And anytime that I felt too comfortable, things have been too easy, I'm like, okay, something's got to change. And when you invest in yourself, in your own, with your learning, with your experiences, I mean, those are permanent. Nobody can take those away. I mean, if you have a huge bank account, or you have a 10,000 square foot house, those are externalities. But I think the more we can invest in ourselves, and the more we can focus on that growth, that then tends to permeate to others, and and also it gives you, going back to the energy, it's also very energizing. When you learn something new, or you do something that's scary, it gets your adrenaline up and you're, so I think it's easier said than done. It is very hard. And, but really, for me, that's a big purpose of life, is just to keep growing and self-actualizing. And, we don't, I mean, you mentioned boundless. I mean, I think, we don't know what our limits are. We set our own limits. And I think, and that's very hard as you get older, because you have lots of messages externally, and you get put in categories, or and I think, just to, like you said, just focus on yourself, learning, doing things that scare you. And I think another thing I heard was from someone, was a good friend of mine, was that you have to believe in yourself, and because no one else is really, you can't count on anyone else to. And she's had a very successful career. And I think just waiting for something to happen, or even for a promotion, waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, we think you should do this. You have to ask for it. You have to go and make it happen. And you have to, you know provided you've done the process and always been adding value, but you are really in control of your career. And whatever you want to do, if you want to go into an adjacent area, or you have to make it happen. I think, I have a default to action. Probably. I think one of the things I've had to learn too is, earlier in my career, I went always a little bit ahead of everyone else, and that can cause some friction. And I think, now I'm much more focused on, winning hearts and minds, and then bringing people together. But yeah, for me, that's, I just love taking decisions, taking action. I'd rather, rather than sit and try to make it perfect and how to do it, I'd rather, spend a little bit of time on that, and then go out and try and do it, and maybe fail 5 times, but you learn from that, and then you get there in the end. And also, maybe it's even better because you've taken those wrong turns. So
yeah, I so far I've written how many pages of notes here? 14.
Oh, okay. Well,
There's so many children.
yeah.
And you talked about the growth element here, that it is, it's learning, it's growing, it's failing. What has been an Achilles heel? Like, when you look back, what has been an Achilles heel, or equally a strength that has cast a negative shadow for you?
I think it's, just going back, I think part of it is not bringing others with me. I think, and I'm constantly pushing myself. I think it's a strength in the sense that I lead by example, so I don't ask anybody on my team to do something I wouldn't do. And I'm still sometimes cold calling or helping the SDRs to kind of, but I think that's an Achilles heel in the sense that, you're trying to always get things done. And then also, when things don't get done, I'm trying to do those things to fix them. And I think, the challenge with that is, one, it tires you out, and two, it doesn't help develop the team to be able to do those things. So I think that's something that, if I look at one of the things I'm really focused on this year is, okay, how do I help the teams to do those things, rather than me stepping in and, fixing things and, running around and, kind of fighting fires. So, which is hard, because it takes a lot of patience and, support for the team. And, you only have so much leadership capital, I always think. So how are you going to spend that, on the team? And, you coming in and fixing something that they haven't done that needs to be done, you're always balancing the urgency of, hitting numbers, and, we've got a board, and, but also, developing the team. So I think for me, a lot of that has been an Achilles heel. And I think in retrospect, I realized that it didn't help me, because, it probably tired me out, and I couldn't do other things that probably better doing. And it also didn't help the team, but it might have got us to the numbers. So I think, trying to I'm very solution focused. I always want to jump to the solution, and fix whatever is causing the friction, or getting to where we need to get to. And so I think, as I realize, as my role gets larger, and you're having a larger and larger target, and you have now thousands of people, I realize I can't do all of that. So I think it's being an Achilles heel, but also an important lesson. And I think now, at this stage in my career, it's more about developing culture, putting systems in place. I think without culture, strategy doesn't really get you very far. So I always start with a culture, and then that's really important to come back to that culture, and then having the right systems to institutionalize how that can work. So there's a lot there that I'm doing now. But yeah, that's been a big Achilles heel for me in my career. So.
And I've got one last question, and I'll pass to Kiet to round it out. And I know we've only got 3 minutes, so this is just I suppose, a quick question from me. You've got 3 boys, and you've talked about, many extraordinary lessons. What is the one lesson, if there was one lesson you would want them to embody, what would that be?
One lesson, that's hard. I mean, there's so many lessons, but I think it's set your own limits. I mean, don't just go out and do what you love, and set your own limits. Don't ever accept anyone else's limits. So, that's what I keep instilling in them every day. So don't, they're, and then it will take you where it takes you. So.
It reminds me, I watched on the flight on the way back the other day, there was this 3-part series of Taylor Swift, and I normally work all, on the plane, but they didn't have Wi-Fi, which was a gift, because then I actually watched. And I love the fact that she has just pushed boundaries. And whenever anyone said, you can't do that, she's like, says who? It really speaks to that. Right. Kit, let me pass to you, because I will just keep going with it. This has just been such a...
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
No, look, Georgie, as promised, Marcel's amazing. I think there's 2-3 books in this conversation that Marcel could be writing. So, Marcel, thank you for being on the show today. Thank you for your amazing insights. I also want to thank you, the audience, for your continued support. It is your continued support, and is you telling Georgie not to keep doing this show is what keeps us going. So definitely appreciate it. And I do think what's important is to realize that what's driving Georgie and I, and his conversations like today, it's really about giving back. It's really providing insights to people, because look, it's lonely, right, in a leadership role. And the best way to really do a good job is to learn and observe. I believe in a true learn it all and share it all culture. And this show is an example of what that means. So thank you, everyone, for your continued support, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Marcel.
Yeah, thanks both. Yeah.